Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 5 of season 2 of Babylon 5, The Long Dark. An unpowered ship, the Copernicus, is drifting through normal space towards Babylon 5, and it's an Earth ship, but one broadcasting a sort of "Hello, we come in peace" message on a frequency Ivanov has not seen used before. On the outer edge of the station, a lurker, the term used for those living outside what might be considered polite society on Babylon 5, is disturbed by a scuffle and proceeds to rage at something in his head, which he identifies as being out there when he goes to an observation port. It's Dwight Schultz, playing a bloke who has mental issues, Kel Surprise. A maintenance bot has been dispatched to grab the mystery ship, whilst Amos accosts Jakar and Londo in passing as he warns of impending doom before Mr. Garibaldi picks him up, saying that he needs a missionary license. The design of the ship is baffling the command crew, but on seeing lettering in English, Sheridan guesses that it should say USS Copernicus, possibly a deep-range Earth ship from 100 years ago before the Centauri gave Earth jumpgate technology. Not sure if that's been established before now. It certainly suggests we were off the beaten track until that point. So the question is, how has this banged-up vessel ended up out here now, and why? And how come there's a possible life sign on board? Sheridan orders it brought into Docking Bay 4. Classic security protocol. Put all the command crew aboard the unknown ship at once without an expendable security individual. Anyway, they find the two crew in cryopods, one dead, one in much better health. However, her signs start to drop, possibly as a result of the ship being opened. Franklin moves her to medbay, but she flatlines along the way, so they have to work on her in a lift as the lift's power seems to fluctuate. Amos is shouting about incoming and they're coming through the walls. Garibaldi says to his colleague that he's had the same dream after being in the war. Possibly also a reference to what Garibaldi said to Sinclair in Babylon Squared when he was seemingly fighting invaders. Ivanova is trying to get the Copernicus' systems up and ends up hitting them, which actually works. Bearing in mind it is a 100-year-old ship, probably not the best idea, but there you go. Whatever works. But the camera work and her senses indicate that she might not be alone on the ship. Amos comes too. He identifies himself as a Gropos, what Garibaldi terms a ground pounder, infantry. So was Garibaldi. He lets Amos go, offering him counselling, which Amos sarcastically rejects, saying why would he need that with everything he has? Franklin's patient has been revived, but Ivanova has discovered that the other cryotube didn't fail, so its occupant was murdered. And it turns out he was murdered in a pretty bizarre fashion, with no trace of his internal organs remaining. He's half the weight he should be. Sensor logs suggest the other passenger was in stasis the whole time. Garibaldi is naturally suspicious, but Franklin says his living patient isn't ready for interrogation just yet, despite being conscious. It was her husband Will in the other tube. We discover in conversation with Jakar that her name is Mariah Cirrus. She has not seen aliens before, so she's getting a crash course on the Zocalo as Franklin tries to answer some of her questions. She realises that she and her husband, had they waited a few more years, jump gates would have arrived and they wouldn't have needed the voyage at all. Interestingly, Franklin says that Earth rented other races' gates before building its own, tying back to the work of the Cortez from the previous episode, of course. Shaking Jakar's hand leads to a flashback of something leaning over her in the Copernicus, and Franklin, the old smoothie, has taken her back to his quarters as she passed out because they were nearer than Medlab. In fairness, he doesn't take it any further even given the opportunity, but he's just asking for trouble professionally. She now knows that her husband was killed because Franklin was interested in her dreams. Amos has been to the Copernicus and senses something has come off the ship. An alien is killed in down below with the same organ removal outcome as with Mariah's husband, but of course she has a Franklin-based alibi. It turns out that Amos is a decorated war veteran, and 47 of his unit were stationed on an outpost where he believes he encountered this dark warrior. Only he survived, and Garibaldi has established that the Copernicus moved through the gravity well of the same moon. So they could be looking at the same thing, and given that it's removing organs with no entry or exit wounds, it may well have eluded their original scans. Sheridan wants to watch on Mariah and is not impressed with the Doctor, much less restrained than Sinclair. He's got to try and explain what's going on in a council meeting. The council meeting is quite interesting. I'm not sure which race the speaker is from, but his talk of dark warriors, soldiers of darkness, being recalled by their masters is of great interest to G'Kar, and basically they want Mariah off the station in case her pretty face is hiding something darker. Londo is less intrigued, and suggests Sheridan finds whatever it is and kill it. When the speaker basically threatens to take matters into his own hands, Sheridan makes it clear in a Dredd style that he is the law on Babylon 5 and will protect both alien and human as needed. Ivanova notes it wasn't the smoothest bit of diplomacy. Garibaldi can't sleep, so he orders Amos up and takes him on a bug hunt. They only find another lurker, but Amos then gives a harrowing account of his first encounter with the creature on the dead world. It came through the wall, killing a man before he could make a sound, and they ran. It didn't kill him, but when he was picked up, he was a lot skinnier than he should have been. It kept him alive to feed off. He has a link to it because of what it took, and now he realises they have unfinished business, and breaks away from Garibaldi to find it, realising his link can be used to track it as Garibaldi had suggested. Mariah has gone back to Copernicus, discussing the state of her relationship with Franklin, acknowledging she'd be moving quickly if they were to get together, but explaining that all she and her husband had left were their lofty ideals, which can only take you so far. Franklin agrees it isn't easy, as his work has always come first, and that needs understanding from a partner, which is hard to find. Mariah now thinks from her dreams that there was something in the cryotube with her, using her to stay alive until it could find another source of food. And of course, Babylon 5 isn't all-you-can-eat buffet. The command staff debate the links between Mariah and Amos and the creature, with Mariah resting in medlab. Christopher Frankie's music kicks up a notch, so you get the impression snack time was coming soon. And it's a fake-out. However, Garibaldi and Franklin do then manage to track it down, and their weapon fire brings Sheridan and Ivanova into the fray. It's tough work. PPGs in isolation only make it back off, but Amos puts himself in harm's way to bring it out again, so that concentrated bee stings can bring it down for good. Amos is fine, sleeping peacefully, finally, in medbay. Mariah is heading back to Earth, seemingly less drawn to Franklin than before. Ivanova has discovered that after entering the Copernicus, the creature had changed its course for Zahar-Doom, not realising its underlying programming was to home in on signal sources. Sheridan says that a few weeks ago he would have shrugged his shoulders. Now he's not so sure, and Ivanova admits to concern as well about what's happening out on the rim. In his quarters, G'Kar has the Book of Jaquan open on a page depicting what could well be an image of the warrior that has just been destroyed on the station. Well, I had to laugh on finishing this one because the actress who played Mariah, Anne-Marie Johnson, was ringing a bell, and I quickly identified why. I looked her up recently, having seen a clip of a suitably obscure film called Robots Jocks that was a much-loved video rental of mine back in the day, where stop-motion robots battled in an arena as a substitute for conventional warfare. She played a substitute mech pilot in that film, so it wasn't just Dwight Schultz who was ringing bells. Speaking of whom, whilst he appears somewhat typecast, I very much enjoyed his performance here, in particular his interaction with Garibaldi when asked to recount his Minbari war experience. Nice to see him given some dialogue that didn't require him to be shouting and flailing his arms around. For the younger viewers, my generation remember him fondly as the howling mad Murdoch from the A-Team series of the 1980s, whilst he also had a quasi-regular role on Star Trek Next Generation and even Star Trek Voyager, which actually saw his character go through some nice development. So, this episode does tie into the overall arc theme of Gathering Darkness, although it's not until the final moments that we get a very categorical confirmation that the creature is a Shadows-related warrior. It clearly has their cloaking technology, but seems to be much larger than the examples we've seen with Mr. Morden before now. This seems to be something between a sleeper agent and an out-and-out warrior. Not invulnerable, but not straightforward for human scanners to detect. And just one took down a fair few opponents. So for the first time, the war has come to Babylon 5 directly, if accidentally. This episode also gives us a little love interest for Franklin, albeit somewhat uncomfortably perhaps, and also explores the idea that the Earth-Minbari War was not fought only in space. It was also being fought along more traditional terrestrial lines, and the Gropos were involved in that side of it. Clearly Garibaldi has his own mental issues from this, so he sympathises with Amos having difficulties now. We also see a little more of Sheridan's character here, and once again we're reminded that he's a far cry from Sinclair's measured approach. He's much more confrontational when it comes to getting the job done. Whether this is the right approach in the long term is obviously debatable, but this is who he is right now, as he continues to find his feet in the role. I did remember this episode, although I hadn't remembered it was Dwight Schultz in it. The cryotube plot device is of course not uncommon in science fiction, as it allows you to time shift the people in question quite usefully, and so allow old school knowledge or approaches to save the day, although that isn't of course the approach that's being taken here. It's interesting that Amos uses biblical terms to refer to the warrior, presumably because its horns and unexplained abilities lead to that sort of analogy, where Jakar would actually give a more historical rather than supernatural basis for its origins. As will increasingly be the case, although this is a filler sort of episode, it is nevertheless a component of the underlying season arc, and does generate more questions about how many more of these creatures might be secreted away in the darkness, preparing to get home, and how they might then operate once they get there. Another piece of the puzzle. I'll see you for the next piece.